Now we're going back a little bit. So chapter 2, as we talked about last week, was kind of parenthetical, showing us uh, Elijah's taking away and Elisha kind of taking over. But now we get back into that familiar pattern of talking about the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah. And so here in 2 Kings chapter 3, we'll read a little bit. We're not going to read the whole chapter right now, but chapter 3, verse 1, it says, Now Jehoram the son of Ahab began to reign over Israel in Samaria the 18th year of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, and he reigned 12 years. And he wrought evil in the sight of the Lord, but not like his father and like his mother, for he put away the image of Baal that his father had made. Nevertheless, he cleaved unto the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, which made Israel to sin. He departed not therefrom. And Mesha, king of Moab, was a sheep master, and rendered unto the king of Israel 100,000 lambs and 100,000 rams with the wool. But it came to pass, when Ahab was dead, that the king of Moab rebelled against the king of Israel. And King Jehoram went out of Samaria at the same time and numbered all Israel. And he went and he sent to Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, saying, The king of Moab hath rebelled against me. Wilt thou go with me against Moab to battle? And he said, I will go up, and as I am as thou art, my people as thy people, and my horses as thy horses. And he said, Which way shall we go up? And he answered, The way through the wilderness of Edom. And so the king of Israel went, and the king of Judah and the king of Edom, and they fetched a compass of 7 days' journey. And there was no water for the host and for the cattle that followed them. And the king of Israel said, Alas, that the Lord hath called these 3 kings together to deliver them into the hand of Moab. But Jehoshaphat said, Is there not here a prophet of the Lord, that we may inquire of the Lord by him? And one of the king of Israel's servants answered and said, Here is Elisha, the son of Shaphat, which poured water on the hands of Elijah. And Jehoshaphat said, The word of the Lord is with him. And so the king of Israel, Jehoshaphat, and the king of Edom went down to him. And Elisha said unto the king of Israel, What have I to do with thee? Get thee to the prophets of thy father, and to the prophets of thy mother. And the king of Israel said unto him, Nay, for the Lord hath called these three kings together to deliver them into the hand of Moab. And Elisha said, As the Lord of hosts liveth, before whom I stand, surely were it not that I regard the presence of Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, I would not look toward thee, nor see thee. He says, But now bring me a minstrel. And it came to pass, when the minstrel played, that the hand of the Lord came upon him. And he says, Thus said the Lord, Make the valley full of ditches. For thus said the Lord, You shall not see wind, neither shall you see rain. All the valley shall be filled with water, that you may drink, both you and your cattle and your beasts. And then he says this, And this is but a light thing in the sight of the Lord. He will deliver the Moabites also into your hand. So we'll pause right there for a minute. And so here we are back in the north, and this is not long after the death of Ahab. After the death of Ahab, his first son, Ahaziah, reigned, but it was very short. We saw that back in chapter 1. And so now his brother, Jehoram, begins to reign. And as always, when we talk about the kings in 1st and 2nd Kings, the author of Kings is far more concerned with the spiritual state, what they did spiritually, than he is really concerned with, just from a historical perspective, how he ruled. Right? And so this is the main concern. Not that he doesn't get into details, he does. But the main concern is the spiritual state, which is why we have this at the very beginning. And so we're told that he was not a godly king. He was wicked. That's verse 2. But he was not as bad. He was not as bad as Ahab. He was not as bad as Jezebel. And it says that he went as far to put away the image that his father had made. And so remember Ahab, and well, really through Jezebel, but Ahab was responsible for bringing in the worship of Baal. They set up this image. They set up all these different high places, and worship of this false god was becoming rampant. Well, here, to his credit, Jehoram comes in and he takes that down. However, and I think we have in Jehoram something that is indicative of something that's very prevalent today, and I'll get into that here in just a second. But what he did is he put away the more obvious sin, I guess you could say. The more obvious sin of this idol represents this false god that the Israelites don't worship, we don't recognize. And so he puts that idol away. But what he does do, verse 3, is it says he cleaved unto the sins of Jeroboam. Now, all of the kings of Israel since Jeroboam have done this. But what was the sin of Jeroboam? You have to go back a good bit. But what Jeroboam did is he sets up these golden images. And what he tells the people is, and you remember the reason he does this is because he doesn't want Israelites leaving Israel to go to Judah to go to the temple. Right? That he doesn't want that to happen. He wants to keep his people where they are. And so he sets up these images, and he doesn't tell them, look at these new gods, right? That's not what he says. He doesn't say, hey, I made these new gods. We don't have to worship Yahweh anymore. That's not what he says. He says, these are your gods that brought you out of Egypt. That's what he says. And so he makes false representations of Yahweh because that was more palpable. That was easier for an Israelite to say, well, he says this is representing Yahweh, so I can pray to this, I can worship this, and it's not too dissimilar, right? This feels better, and so here Jehoram, he gets involved with the sin that looks closer to the real thing. And this is very, very dangerous because we see a lot of this happening today. And I think preeminently and we talked about this a long time ago, but preeminently in the New Apostolic Reformation. But you see it in basically all these false groups, where if you talk to somebody in the New Apostolic Reformation, or even if you talk to somebody in Jehovah's Witness or Mormonism, whatever, any of these organizations, they can word their beliefs in such a way that it sounds palpable to someone who is maybe very immature in the faith or doesn't know a lot about the Bible, but they can word their beliefs in such a way that they would think, well, this is Christianity. But it's not. It might be close to the real thing, but false worship is false worship, and false worship is always harmful, even if it's close to the real thing. But if it's not the real thing, you're not worshiping the right God. And so here, Jehoram, I think the biggest problem with him is that he felt more comfortable with the sins of Jeroboam because they felt closer to the real thing. And so he fell into this trap, again, that so many people fall into today, that as long as it seems close to right, surely it is right. And so all these false religions out there, again, they're preaching and teaching a Jesus that is maybe close to what the Bible says, but is so far away from the reality of who Christ was that they're teaching a false Christ. And that's exactly what Mormons do. That's exactly what Jehovah's Witnesses do. I believe they do this again in the New Apostolic Reformation. But this is the same thing that's been going on for thousands of years. It's still false worship, and false worship is still harmful. It still damns people, and that's exactly what was happening here with Jehoram. Now, just to briefly, during the reign of Ahab, and we talked about this, so I won't rehash all this. But Ahab was, spiritually wicked. We understand that, but he was a competent king. As far as leading the nation, he did an okay job. And so during Ahab, Israel was politically strong. And you see this here where the nation of Moab was actually subject to Israel, specifically because of Ahab. And they were paying a tax to Israel. You see there in verse 4, that they were paying this tax of 100,000 lambs, 100,000 rams with the wool. They were doing this during the time of Ahab and probably on into the time of Ahaziah. But as soon as Ahaziah dies, now Jehoram is ruling. The people of Moab begin to understand these guys are not Ahab. And so they begin to rebel. I think what we can understand is that they stopped sending the tax. They stopped sending the goods. And so like his father, like Ahab, Jehoram here, he reaches out to the king of Judah. He reaches out to Jehoshaphat and says, hey, I've got to go to this battle. Would you support me? Will you come with me? And interestingly enough, just like he told Ahab, Jehoshaphat tells him the same thing. I will go. I am as thou art. My people is thy people. My horse is thy horses. All that I have you can use. We'll go with you. We'll help you fight. Now, Jehoram certainly would have wanted a bigger fighting force, but he also wanted to go through Judean territory. Jehoshaphat specifically asked him which way we're going to go in verse 8. And he says, the way through the wilderness of Edom, which means for Israel, they were going to have to go through Judean territory, go through the wilderness of Edom, because he wanted to attack Moab from the south. And so they were going to have to dip down into Jehoshaphat's territory in order to do this. And so it could be that he didn't ask him for no other reason than I need safe passage through Judah. Now, also, I do think he probably just would have liked the extra hands, which Jehoshaphat was happy to give. Now, back when Ahab asked, if you remember the story there, Jehoshaphat very quickly asked, hey, we need to seek the prophets about this, right? We need to seek the prophets about if this is God's will. They don't do that here, at least not yet. And so they don't seek the word of the prophet. They just take out. And so them, actually, along with the king of Edom, they go 7 days out into the wilderness. And then all of a sudden they're in this dangerous situation where the text tells us there was no water. There's no water for the host. There's no water for the cattle that followed them. And so neither they, their men, their beasts, none of them are going to be able to have water. Obviously, that's not a winning solution if you're getting prepared to go do this battle. And then what we see here is Jehoram, he instantly blames God, which is so fascinating because he never seeked out the will of God. Not once did he inquire whether or not this is what God actually wanted him to do. He wanted to do it. He prepared. He left. And now that things are going bad, now it's God's fault, right? Now I'm mad at God. God, you brought us out here to die. You brought us out here. We're going to lose this battle. Well, he never cared before. And this is, again, very indicative of the way that so many people operate, which is where God never has, or is never a thought in their mind until things go bad. And then God enters their mind, but so often just so that they can have something to throw the blame against. Well, God, this is your fault. Well, they never really cared before. They were never seeking God before. They don't praise God when things are going well. It's only God's fault when things are going bad. And so again, Jehoram here, I think, is he's an ancient man with very modern sensitivities. He's an ancient man with some of the problems that we see happening all the time. And so at this point, finally, Jehoshaphat does what they should have done at the very beginning. He asked, right, is there not a prophet here? And the king's servants, Jehoram's servants, I don't know how they know this. The text doesn't tell us. But somehow they know that Elisha is there. And also, we don't know why Elisha was there. I mean, they're not in Israel anymore. And so for whatever reason, Elisha was perhaps following the army. We don't know if he was there because God led him there. We don't know if it was just he was interested in the goings-on of Israel. We don't know why he's there. But for some reason, he's there. And the king's servants know this. And so they tell them, Elisha's here. And interestingly, the three men, they go to him. Ahab, he brought people to him. These three men, they go to Elisha. And as they get there, the first thing Elisha says, he says, as the Lord of hosts liveth before whom I stand. In verse 13, he says, what have I to do with thee? Get thee to the prophets of thy father, to the prophets of thy mother. He basically says, I'm not going to talk to you. First of all, you don't care. Second of all, you should have inquired of the Lord before you left. And third of all, you are just like your father. Even if I tell you something, it's not going to change anything, right? You don't care about what God says. And so he originally says, I'm just not going to do it. I'm not going to talk to you. And none of this is going to change. And so, interestingly enough, that changes. Now, he does so for the sake of Jehoshaphat, which is interesting. Jehoshaphat, he respected Jehoshaphat. He did not respect Jehoram, but he does respect Jehoshaphat. And so he changes his mind. He agrees to speak to them. And so now he gives them a prophecy. Again, the problem is they don't have water, right? They don't have water, and this is going to cause serious issues down the line. And so he agrees to do this. And the first thing he says, and again, we're not told why, but verse 15, he says, bring me a minstrel. He wants music to be playing. And again, we don't know why, but perhaps, which is as strong as we could put it, perhaps he just wanted music to be playing so that he could kind of better focus on listening to the Lord. Again, I don't know that that's why, but that's a possibility. But nevertheless, after doing this, after listening to the music, the word of God comes to him, and he tells them, and it's probably not what they expected. Verse 16 says, and he said, thus saith the Lord, make this valley full of ditches. Again, probably not what they expected, probably not how they figured God would answer this prayer. But as we have seen throughout the Old Testament and New Testament, but God oftentimes answers our prayers and oftentimes gives us the answer that we wanted, but just not in the way we expected it to happen. All right, this happens a lot. And so here again, what did they want? They wanted water. God gave them water, but he did not give them water the way that they expected. And so, they've seen God answer this prayer before, obviously, or not seen it, but obviously with their people. They know Moses spoke to a rock and it had water. Moses struck the rock and the water poured out. And so they know that God can do all these miraculous things. But again, here he says, go get your shovels and start digging, right? We need to make a whole lot of ditches here. And then really the crux of the whole passage here is verse 17. And he says, "For thus saith the Lord, you shall not see wind, neither shall you see rain, yet that valley shall be filled with water, that you may drink, both ye, your cattle, and your house, and your beasts. And this is but a light thing in the sight of the Lord. He will deliver Moabites also into your hand." And so he says, go dig these ditches. God's going to fill them up, not with rain, not with dew. They're just going to be full of water, right? This is undoubtedly going to be a miraculous thing. And he says, but at the end of the day, that's too small of a thing for God to do. And here's why this matters. Because God is proving himself here, and he's proved himself to Ahab, he proved himself to Ahaziah, he's going to prove himself to Jehoram. But here's what he knows. If all I do is fill those ditches with water, what's going to happen is in the morning, these guys are going to wake up, they're going to see those ditches full of water, they're not going to praise God, they're going to be glad that they dug the ditches. Right? And so they're going to glorify themselves. And so he's saying that's too small a thing. So what God is also going to do, because that's too small, he's also going to make sure that you beat the Moabites. He's going to give you victory in this particular battle. And so again, I love the fact that this is a light thing. The light thing was a miraculous undertaking. The light thing was having water appear where water should not have appeared. You and I can't do this. We could never do this. And yet, it's a light thing for God. And oh, by the way, you're also going to be victorious. And as we'll see, the water actually plays a role in the victory as well. And so let's read on here, because this is where we stopped reading. And so verse 19, he says, you're going to be victorious. And he says, and you shall smite every fenced city and every choice city, and shall fell every good tree, and stop all wells of water, and mar every good piece of land with stones. And it came to pass in the morning when the meat offering was offered that, behold, there came water by the way of Edom, and the country was filled with water. And when all the Moabites heard that the kings were come up to fight against them, they gathered all that were able to put on armor, and upward and stood on the border. And they rose up early in the morning, and the sun shone upon the water, and the Moabites saw the water on the other side as red as blood. And they said, this is blood. The kings are surely slain, and they have smitten one another. Now, therefore, Moab to the spoil. And when they came to the camp of Israel, the Israelites rose up and smote the Moabites, so that they fled before them. And they went forward, smiting the Moabites, even in their country. And they beat down the cities on every good piece of land, cast every man his stone, and they filled it, and they stopped all the wells of water. They felled all the good trees. And then it says, only in Kir-hareseth left they the stones thereof. Howbeit the slingers went about and smote it. It says, and when the king of Moab saw that the battle was too sore for him, he took with him 700 men and drew swords to break through even unto the king of Edom. They could not. And then he took his eldest son that should have reigned in his stead and offered him for a burnt offering upon the wall. And there was great indignation against Israel, and they departed from him and returned to their own land. And so exactly as Elisha said, God brought the water. Exactly as he said, dig the ditches, God will bring the water. They did that. And he used the water, again, interestingly enough, to not only satisfy the thirst of Israel, he used the water to give them the defeat of Moab. Right? Which is just a fascinating thing. Again, this is too light a thing. God's going to do greater things than you can imagine. And so as the Moabite, it's such a fascinating story. As the Moabite army gets up and they're preparing for the battle, they see the same water that God blessed the Israelites with, but the manner in which the sun was hitting it, the light coming off of that water, to them it looked like these were not ditches of water, but ditches of blood. And so immediately they think, oh, our gods have already granted us the victory. We don't have to do anything. The Israelite army is already dead. All we have to go down is reap the spoils. And so there we see at the end of verse 23, Moab to the spoil. And so they come up upon what they are expecting to be a battlefield full of nothing but dead Israelite soldiers. That's what they're expecting to see. And all of a sudden, these men almost come up from behind the grave, at least from their perspective, and they begin to fight. And so not only were they caught off guard, but they're probably terrified. And so they flee. The Israelites go in and they stop all the wells. It says that they throw down stones, which is essentially a way to, if you're a farmer and you've cultivated a field and somebody just takes a bunch of boulders and throws it out on your field, it's going to tear up your crops. It's going to mess up your ground. That's what they did. They're just devastating new cities, which again is exactly what God prophesied would happen. And so God does all that God said that he would do. Israel won. They got the water. They subdued the cities. They subdued the land as well. And then the last two verses, which are really, it's a terrible thing. And what is a kind of this last ditch effort? The king of Moab, for whatever reason, he kind of turns his sights onto the king of Edom. Remember, the king of Edom is there with him. He's fighting with him. But he wants to, basically, if nothing else, he already knows we've lost, right? The battle is over. But perhaps we can kill the king of Edom, right? Which would, in his mind, at least give them some, at least small victory. And so he takes this group of 700 men. They're trying to find the king of Edom, but they're unsuccessful. They can't do it. Again, God was already granting the victory to Israel and their allies here. And then verse 27, it says, Then he took his eldest son that should have reigned in his stead and offered him for a burnt offering upon the wall. Now, as terrible as this is, and it's terrible, this was actually not an uncommon thing. This was not that it happened all the time, but this was not something that the Israelites would have never heard of. This was not uncommon for the Moabite god, that's god of Chemosh. They oftentimes would have sacrificed children. Now, we don't know how old his son was, but here again, as this man in desperation, and imagine the wickedness involved to go so far as to do something like this, to take your child, to take any child, much less your own child, and go up upon this wall, offer them as a burnt offering to some god that you think this is somehow going to appease. Why you would want to worship a god like that, again, is beyond me. But this is exactly what this man does. And for reasons that are unclear, and I will tell you, verse 27 is widely debated. Because what it says is he does this, he offers a son, and then it says, and there was great indignation against Israel. That phrase right there is highly, highly debated. But for whatever reason, this particular act causes Israel to leave. And not only causes them to leave, but we saw in verse 25 that they were able to kind of defeat the whole country almost, except for the city of Kirharaseth, which was the capital. And so this is where the king was holed up. That's where he sacrificed his son. And that act kind of caused Israel to leave. And there's there's many different ideas as to why Israel left, but we're not told. For whatever reason, this causes Israel to leave. And it says, and they departed from him and they returned to their own land. But what I want to key in on here is that this act of the king of Moab here offering his son is given to us in contrast to the actions of God. And so what did God do? God, for people who had, for all practical purposes, forgotten him, right? They left. They did not inquire of him. They didn't seek the word of the prophets. They didn't do any of this. They just left and did what they wanted to do. In spite of all that, God grants them grace in that he gives them the water. And then above and beyond that, he gives them the victory in the battle. And so in contrast to that is this false god, which, as I put in the lesson here, is really not a god at all. It's a demon in disguise is what it is. And so what this false god / demon demands is death and destruction. And so this is the difference. One freely offers grace, one freely offers protection, and the other demands it. The other demands death. The other demands destruction. And so again, when you compare the one true God to all the others who claim there to be gods out there, there is no comparison. There is no comparison that can be made. And so here we have a story that is kind of drugged through the ages. Anytime somebody worships this false god. Now, Kirharaseth aside, the damage was done. The city survived, but Moab was for all practical purposes destroyed. The victory was won. Now Jehoram, and we don't know which one it is. Jehoram either thought God would not or could not give them water, and that they would be defeated. We don't know which one it was, but Jehoram definitely thought one of the two. And so, as I said earlier, God was proving himself. God proved himself to Jehoram by not only giving them water, but by using the water to give them victory. And so I'll end by saying this: no task is too big for God. In fact, he specifically tells them the miraculous action of the water, that's too small a thing. God's got to do more. And so no task is too big, and he is never without the means to bring about his will. He can use the mouth of the prophet. He can use the shovel of the soldier. He can use the refraction of the sun's light. It doesn't matter how he chooses to do it. God will always bring about his will. And so a fascinating chapter here in 2 Kings chapter 3, and kind of this, not an introduction to Elisha by any means, but the first kind of action we've seen of Elisha out on his own, really. And so it's an interesting start to what we're going to see over the next several chapters. All right. As far, well, hold on. There's one thing